What is the most absurd thing you experienced during a job interview? The CEO who was interviewing me realized that we both had done our master thesis under the same professor. The interview ended then and there, and we spent the next 1 hour comparing notes about the professor who was notorious for being absent-minded, went home with the job offer and more money than I had asked for. I was once asked to draw a picture of a tree. That was the only instruction. Then they sent my tree off to be analyzed and came back with a report on my personality and work ethic based on my tree. I got the job. Thankfully they didn't take the tree analysis too seriously because I later got to read mine and it was terrible and very inaccurate. I was in an interview with 4 people from their team. They were giddy about asking me random questions that had nothing to do with the work. It was literally just random riddles. I got one right and they all laughed and said I was the only one who had got that particular riddle correct. Seemed like they were happy to not be working. After about 15 minutes of them asking me questions, I finally asked them about the role and what I would be involved in doing. The hiring manager cut me off and said, "This is an interview, we ask you the questions, you don't ask us questions." I was confused, but we kept going and they never once mentioned anything about the job. The call ended. I got an email from HR saying I did well in the interview and I just wrote her back explaining that was the weirdest interview I've ever had and I was not interested in the position. About an hour later I got an email from the hiring manager angry that I wasted his time. I still don't know what they were trying to hire me to do. In my last year of college, I traveled from the Midwest to Orange County for a job interview. My first time in SoCal. I had interviews at a table in a conference room. During an interview, there was an earthquake, my first earthquake. I quickly crawled under the table because that's what I thought you were supposed to do. What I didn't realize was smaller earthquakes come and go very quickly and are no big deal to locals who have been through many of them. The interviewer just kept asking me questions as I was climbing back into my chair. I got the job, but was known as the guy who crawled under the table during his interview. I later got to meet the CEO in his office, and he crawled under his desk as I walked in. I said something like, "Ha, very funny, because what else can you say?" I didn't work there very long, for unrelated reasons. The hiring manager spent the first 20 minutes venting about how much she hates her job and everything she had to do that day, then told me that I would be expected to get just a few hours a week, on an uneven schedule, and that I better be grateful for it or she'll cut my hours to make me quit instead of firing me. Looking at you, Dollar General. No wonder everyone there looks like they want to die and the aisles are always filled with unopened boxes. Pretty short, but left me thinking, what the fuck? I was interviewing for just a standard position behind the bar at a hotel wedding venue. The interviewer, who was the general manager, asked why I'd left my last job. I was honest and said that the place's security kind of sucked and after being robbed, I'd had enough. The manager gave me a puzzled look and said, "Well, you're gonna get robbed every so often here too." I stared at him for a moment and then realized he wasn't joking. I stood up, told him it wasn't going to work, thanked him for his time, and left. Went to an interview. It was a group interview for an MLM insurance company. 100 commission, and they talked about getting your friends and family signed up. I felt so duped. I walked out at the first opportunity. A few other candidates were taking notes like crazy when I left. I mean, I was desperate for work too, but not stupid. I was interviewing at a company that my close friend worked at. Since I was flown in for the interview 500 miles away from home, it was a full 8-hour interview with all the managers and also the software developers. Halfway through, my friend comes in and says, "Hey, are you good? Do you need any coffee or water or anything?" So I said, "No, I'm good." "Then how's the interviews going?" "So I'm like pretty good, I think." Then he says, "Okay, and let me leave you with this." Then he proceeds to let out a loud 10-second fart, and as he's leaving, he'll send in the next interviewer. My favorite story is getting like 20 minutes in and her asking a question about a previous company I had never worked for. I said as much. She frantically scans the resume in front of her and spits out, "I'm interviewing the wrong panicked poodle!" I stare at her. She stares at me. She asks another perfunctory question, starts to wrap up and realizes to her horror that I'm scheduled to meet with the VP immediately after her. Awkward introductions ensue, followed by some frantic signaling that's ignored by the VP. VP and I love each other. Talk big picture all day long. VP makes manager hire me. It was a job with a lot of issues. The department had bullying issues, including the supervisor, but I still outlasted her and managed to get transferred into a different part of the company. Years ago, many years ago, I was applying for a labor job at a housing development being built. I was talking to the guy and the topic got around to boats. I asked him to hang on a sec and went and grabbed a picture of a boat I took that was in my car. I showed the guy and said, "This is the coolest boat I ever saw," and told him where I saw it. He said yeah, it is a good boat, he's owned it for years and loves it. Needless to say, he hired me immediately. When I was like 16, I went to interview for a front desk job at an insurance agency. The 50-something man interviewing me asked me, do you understand the importance of deer hunting and are you willing to hunt? We lived in Chicago. I don't even remember what I responded with. I've never been so confused in my life. It's been 12 or so years since then and I still think about it periodically. Not me, but a couple of former coworkers. I once worked at a store where a previous manager was really into phrenology and had measured applicants' heads with calipers before making hiring decisions. They didn't last long in their manager role for obvious reasons. I didn't believe the guy when he told me, but another coworker confirmed the story. In one of my first programming interviews, I got a technical question. The interviewer started, I want you to make a program that counts from 1 to 100 and I'm like, is this FizzBuzz? He's like, no, this is a different question and every time the number is divisible by 7, you output 7 to the console. And every time it's divisible by 11 you output 11 to the console and I'm like, and every time it's divisible by both, you output 711? He's just like, yeah okay it's FizzBuzz. I shouldn't have said anything. I would written it in 5 lines in 40 seconds. Was asked to tell my entire life story from the beginning while interviewing at the Bay. Literally like from when I was born to now, and on top of that they were interviewing me and a girl I didn't know at the same time, and when I finished she didn't tell me to stay, she said to go, so this other girl just sat there in silence for like 15 minutes listening to my life story. I got asked to tell a dirty joke during an interview. I was 100% not comfortable with that and wound up rejecting a second interview. I'm in Canada. In the mid-90s, I applied to a well-paying job in a hospital cafeteria. I was referred there by an agency. My first interview went well, she was very nice and said I had great qualifications. The second was bizarre. The woman, who was the cafeteria manager, looked me up and down and said I could expect to be hazed by my coworkers. I got up and walked out and went to the first interviewer's office, reported what I was told. She sat there looking rather stunned. And I left. It was so blatant. And apparently legal at the time. The interviewee described a time he was hanging out, drinking by the creek one day, and there was a guy he owed money who was threatening to beat him up because he hasn't paid him. But he calmed this other guy down by offering him his flask of brandy. In a job interview, this was what he thought was a good story to tell when asked about an example of conflict resolution experience. Phone interview for store manager position with a major big box decor company that is closed on Sundays. Asked every single question it is not legal to ask. Proud about giving Sundays off to spend with family, then asked if I had a problem working 70-80 hours a week. Guess you have no life until Sunday if you're not sleeping all day. They didn't ask me a single question. They told me what the job was for and then told me they would call me back. I was the first interview, they hired someone else and then he quit 2 days into the job, so I got a call and now I am a forklift driver.